Okay, so we're going to do a panel today on different roads to learning software. And so I'm going to introduce the panelists. And so we have some chairs up here. Just go ahead and start moving those into a position that makes sense for humans. Here. All right. First up, let's introduce Tom. Tom Kowal is learned through a boot camp. He is currently a principal software crafter at A-Flight. And so he's going to be talking about his experience with boot camps. So welcome, Tom, everybody. No, I'm going to be standing up. Yeah. Next, I'll introduce Drew. Drew Adams works for SUSE, right?
SUSE, yes.
He is also an advocate for open source software. He's taught himself software engineering, so he's going to be representing the self-teaching path. Everyone, welcome Drew. Next, we'll have Amanda Aizuss. And Amanda is a crafter at A-Flight. She's going to sit down immediately and not stand up. And she's going to be representing a computer science degree path. So everyone welcome Amanda. And finally we have for apprenticeship programs, we're going to be showing off Corey Wazinski. Corey is currently learning software. And he's also an improviser and a science fiction writer. So, cool. I think the first thing we should do, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then I'm going to open it up to questions for you guys out in the audience, and also panelists. You're certainly welcome to ask each other questions, or to ask questions in general to the group as the mood strikes you. But let's start with, why don't we talk about telling us a story of the path you took to learn software. Along with that, maybe why you learned it, or what it was like on your journey, any of that kind of stuff. So I guess, Tom, let's just start with you.
So I think I started sometime around high school. A buddy of mine had a C++ book on his shelf and picked it up, had no idea what it was about. Approached it a few times over the course of probably over a year. And each time came back to it and kind of got a little bit further in the book. I remember my first few attempts, it was what the code didn't even compile, and I didn't realize that the snippets that they were showing you in the book weren't even meant to compile. So I'm sitting here like, what's going on? I'm doing exactly what you want me to do. It was frustrating, but it was also really exciting when things finally clicked. And I kind of compare it to looking under a microscope. It's the same idea where you have this tool that lets you see things that normally you would be able to see, right? Whether it's patterns of data or whatever it is that you're doing. And so I kind of fell in love with that there. And so that was kind of a hobby for a while. One of the first jobs where I was doing any kind of programming was at an injection molding company. They had a bunch of robots just kind of laying around. They wanted to automate the production line, and it was a very low budget thing where they brought in people like myself who didn't have a whole lot of experience and said, here's what we want to do, take a stab at it, and not much more guidance besides that. And that was kind of my first realization that I could make money programming. And that it was something that I could contribute to in more than just a hobby form. And around that time I discovered Dev Boot Camp in Chicago. They were just opening up their first campus, and I was reading Hacker News on my lunch break at work, and I'm like, oh, this is exactly what I want. This sounds fantastic. And that was a really short, very condensed course. It was 9 weeks, I think, total. So definitely not something that gets you 100% ready for the job, but it was invaluable in terms of meeting people in the industry. Up until that point, I had never really spoken with anyone about software development, except for a few folks that I worked with at that injection molding company. So it was very closed off and just kind of online communities. And so through that boot camp, discovering other people that were passionate about it, and discovering meetups in Chicago, and just getting to know folks at A-Flight actually through that company. year, went through the apprenticeship because I felt, you know, obviously 9 weeks, like I said, is not nearly enough time to get yourself ready, and coming here and being able to work alongside the folks at A-Flight and learn and continue to improve was something that I really wanted to do. That was my path, basically. And now I'm here. That was like 5 years ago in Chicago. Came out here to help start the office and with the company.
I forgot to mention, my name is Ian Carroll, by the way. I'm also a software crafter here at A-Flight, and I taught myself software engineering using Scrum. However, Drew taught himself software engineering as well. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I'm self-taught, and being self-taught, it's a trickle, right? If I had to say anything that sort of like got me to where I am, it's my own just innate interest and I would say affinity for computers. I like computers. I think they're fun machines, right? And that affinity has been something that when things get hard, when things get confusing, when I'm too stupid to understand the problem, I'm going to stick with it because I'm just interested in it. And so I found that affinity in high school, and I just stuck with it. And I am self-taught, and I had this very wild sort of path to get to where I am today. I didn't just graduate like high school and go to college and get a job. That wasn't my path. So I ended up just tinkering for a long time and teaching myself. And never did I say, I want to be a programmer, I want to be a software developer. More, I was interested in the problems I could solve. And I'm lazy, so I don't want to do things manually. So once I found out I could script things, I could program things, oh yeah, that's the thing I'm gonna do then. And so I would just do that. I just write a script to do things. I'd be reading other people's programs out of my curiosity. You know, wake up one morning, how does cat work? I don't know. I'm just gonna read the code. I'm not gonna understand it, but I'm gonna read it, right? I'm always exposing myself to code. And I started my career in tech, in DevOps. And again, it plays on that affinity for the computers in general, for systems, and for just solving the problem and being lazy about it. I don't want to do things manually, so I want to leverage the computer as much as possible. That's going to take me confronting my own ignorance and teaching myself whatever it is I need to learn to get the job done. And that's really how I've done it, is I just, starting in high school, I was introduced to computers and just slowly but surely, all right, well, I guess I can write some code now, I guess, because it's been exposed to it. You learn enough shell programming, okay, well, now I learned some Python too, now I know some Ruby as well. Now, no one really knows Perl, but, you know, I've written some myself as well. You know, you just end up, I guess I know enough of this to get by, or I can solve a problem with this. Yeah, I mean, I have the title of software developer, but my goal is not to be a developer. My goal is to solve a problem, right? That's the thing that drives me, is computers are interesting, and these problems are interesting, and that's a means to the end.
Cool. Yeah, so on the opposite end of the spectrum is Amanda, and you had a very different approach, right?
Yeah, so I tell people that I've been super passionate about computers and software ever since I learned how to use iMovie to edit videos when I was in 5th grade at this like movie making camp that I went to. And I realized that like people were making this thing that I used that was so powerful and so easy to use And then when I was in like 7th or 8th grade, that's when the iPhone came out, and then later on Apple opened up the App Store to third-party developers. So I went out and bought an Objective-C book, or an iOS with Objective-C book, one of those things. And I got nowhere with that because I knew nothing. I would tinker around on my computer. I learned how to like make your terminal talk to you, but I didn't know anything about programming. I was fortunate enough to go to a really excellent middle school that actually, and high school, that had a web design class. So in 8th grade, I learned about how web pages are structured, and I learned HTML and CSS. And then in 9th grade, I took an intro to programming class. And then in 10th grade, I took AP computer science. So it was a very like traditional path. However, I never expected to end up as a software developer because I had a really hard time in my computer science classes. So going into college, I was like, oh, I'll probably do like science or econ or something like that. I didn't expect to do computer science. But somehow, like sort of with help from a friend who I had who was older than I was, who had gone through getting a minor in computer science, he sort of convinced me that I should at least try taking a course. So I took, in my 2nd year, I took the computer science, like the intro computer science class, and I think just like second time's the charm. Like sometimes when you first start learning something, it's really challenging, and I don't think that I really had the support that I needed, and I think I was so focused on just like getting a grade that I wasn't like really learning it. So yeah, in college I just really fell in love with computer science, and so I got a computer science degree. Yeah, that's how it went.
Cool. Yeah. And Corey, you are currently learning software.
That's true.
Yeah.
So I am right in the, I'm at the start of where everyone kind of chooses their path. Are they going to specialize? Are they going to? My draw to it was I went to school for a completely different field. It was forensic chemistry, and I minored in theater. And for me, it was I wasn't able to get a job in that field, so I always had a creative outlook, creative writing, acting, improvising. So I found what my mom did when she was younger is you work in a restaurant. And that's where I'm currently at now. And I've been working in this place for so long, but I was a video game tester before that. And I was, yes, in QA, but a lot of times brought into the dev team to highlight specific issues that they weren't able to recreate. So that was my first taste of software, walking into these cages and seeing just hunched over, as if like mole people on with like so much caffeine just everywhere. And I was like, oh, this is cool. And one guy said, hey, if you like this, we could show you more. But there was never any time. For me, it was I wanted to get into computers for a while, but I didn't know like how to start. And then I met Ian over at our improv studio, and he said, well, I kind of learned computers. I'm like, how did you do that? He's like, well, I kind of had a mentorship program. And it's like, oh, that's something that I'd really be interested in. He's like, great, if you're willing to work hard. And that's the thing, it is. It's about working, are you willing to put in the work? So for me, it's kind of self-taught. I mean, I was able to get a book published last year on my own. I produced my own podcast. There's all these things that I've always been able to teach myself, but a mentor is nice because they can kind of recalibrate where you need to go. And if there's something that I'm struggling with, then I know that Ian has definitely struggled with, and it's always nice when I see that grin come across his face because he's like, oh, he knows that I'm frustrated because he felt this exact same thing. So it's nice to have that. You have like someone always in your corner. And I think that's what I wanted to help me get into software, because I don't know C++, I don't know PowerShell, I don't know these things, but I'm willing to learn, I like learning, and I'm always up for a challenge, so that's how I got into software.
Yeah, and coming from the mentorship angle, it's great because I'm really lazy. So Corey does all the work. I just occasionally look in and go like, oh yeah, maybe do that instead. And that's pretty much it.
It's pretty much our relationship.
So looking back on things, let's see, the next question I had for everybody is, if you had the chance to renew your education, knowing what you know now, what would you change, if anything? Corey, I'm going to start on your end.
I would say no, because my mom was a career counselor, and I took tests when I was first getting into college because I didn't know what I wanted to take, and it pointed towards computers. And she said, you know, computers in like 10 years is going to be oversaturated, though, which is true, but that's because that's all everything is nowadays. So my mom had it half right. So I would not change because I had that experience of going to college. I learned a lot got interested into a field that I really enjoyed. And if I was willing to move out of California, which I'm not, I could have a job like that in forensic science. But for me, I think learning software now, where it's a little more enticing, engaging, you're seeing the limitless possibilities with it. I think it's a more exciting time now than it was back then.
Cool.
Are you going down the line?
Yeah, I'm just going to go down the line.
I wouldn't change like my approach, meaning that I took the traditional like learn it in school thing because I was interested in it. I would change, I wish I could tell myself like it's okay if you don't get this right away. It doesn't it's okay if you don't get an A on this test. Like that doesn't really mean much. You can still like write good software and not necessarily like excel and like be really great at computer science. And I think, I don't know, I guess it would have been nice if I could have figured out faster that this is something that I really like to do and that I can do. Because I was like, I guess like a teenager when Codecademy was coming out, and like there are a lot more resources online as there are now to like teach yourself how to code. And I tried, like I said earlier, sort of teaching myself by like getting a book and trying to learn how to make iOS apps. But for me, the best way to learn was to have like some sort of curriculum, to have that accountability. I don't think I really would have been able to do it myself. So yeah, I wouldn't change anything. Besides being more positive.
Besides sort of echoing what you guys said, especially your point on just sort of, you know, when you hit those frustrating parts, just staying positive, and you don't need to be a rock star right out of the gate, sort of thing. I think the major thing for me that I would change is I had a real hard time understanding that when I talked to someone who had experience and they sounded like they knew everything, I misunderstood that. I thought they knew everything and they got what they had because they knew everything. But that wasn't the situation. They know everything because they learned it as they went along, and they don't know everything. They just know everything in comparison to me. And that was really frustrating. That was adding to my frustration early on, was that I would get really frustrated because I thought I needed to build myself this throne of knowledge. And through that sort of trickle that I talked about earlier, this little bit by little bit, I came to understand not only computers and the technology, but the industry and the human dynamics involved with it. Did I come to realize that, no, these people are just people doing the best they can with what they got. And whatever their background was, whether it was self-taught or formal education or whatever it was, most people, so long it's hard knowledge. If you know it, you know it. No one argues with that. That's typically the way I would interact with people, and I would come to realize that, wait, no. We don't need to build, I don't need to build myself a throne of knowledge. I just need to be okay with working under my own ignorance. And that would be the thing I would change, or change more quickly in my path, is realizing that I don't need that throne of knowledge. I can operate under my own ignorance just fine and figure it out as I go along and learn as I do. And so long as I get good at that learning as I'm doing, the faster I get at that, the better I do. The faster I excel. It's like exponential. And that would be, to punctuate, that's the thing I would change.
So I would probably change, I think there's a couple things I would change. I would try to get involved in the community earlier on. I feel like it took me a long time to realize like how valuable it is to have other people to just talk to about this stuff. And it's inspiring to hear people talk about the things that they're working on, and it's just, you walk away from the meetup or wherever it is, conference, whatever you go to, you walk away and you're like, oh man, I want to go and consume all of these books now, and it's just that like extra boost of energy that's super important. I also think I'd focus more on general like design, software design theory, as opposed to like specifically trying to learn a language or a framework or something, because that really changed kind of how I approach software development. It's no longer like how do I get the problem done. It's how do I solve the problem. It's how do I solve it in a way that's going to stand the test of time and kind of evolve. And it's much more rewarding, I think, than and more interesting. And it kind of it's applicable across all of the tech stacks that you're going to work with. So that's what I would focus on.
Yeah. For me, I'd just like to add on to that a little bit, that what really made a difference for me was learning how to think about software. Not so much about the knowledge of the software itself, but how to figure things out yourself. How to approach the problem, so the process. So for me, learning agile methodologies like Scrum actually really helped. Also, because of the fact that I am a mentor now, it means that I do get to experiment on my apprentice and try and figure out whether or not I could do it faster. So, yeah, that's another thing. Thanks for being my guinea pig, Corey. So I'm just going to open this up to whoever wants to ask it, or answer it, I should say. What was the hardest part of learning software?
Time management for me. Like, there's so many things to learn. How do you focus on anything? And for a long time, I think to this day probably, I feel like I have like the best handle on it now, but I still struggle with staying focused and not chasing too many rabbit holes and getting, like you pick up one article that you're interested in, and then in there's like 17 terms that you're not familiar with, and then you go and chase those down, and it's just like an endless web of things, and that's not really productive. I think I still struggle with kind of how do I structure my learning.
I think that, and this is something that comes with experience. For me, what is still the hardest part about writing software is determining like what your abstractions are going to be. If I was to answer this question while I was in school, I'd probably be like, oh, my algorithms class or my formal language theory class, I don't know how to write these proofs. But that's not really like software. So, yeah.
Why is it not software?
Well, I mean, it is low level, but I mean, it's not really like, when it comes to like writing the code and what you're doing every day, it's like how do you take this low level concept and turn it into something that the computer can understand, and then also that the people you're working with can understand, and future developers can understand. And that, to me, is the most challenging part of learning how to write software.
I think something I continue to find difficult and I think very rewarding too in its difficulty is sort of similar to the sort of abstraction thing, but like thinking about the problem domain that you're trying to solve with software. And I always think about it, and I talk about it to myself as mental modeling. Like I have to mentally model the problem domain. And how well I map mentally that problem domain, I may begin structuring code in my mental map before I even touch any code. Like, I'm starting to think, the way I think about that problem domain actually ends up in the architecture of my abstractions, of the things I'm building. And so, having that learning problem domains and getting an understanding of that problem domain quickly enough to be effective at tackling it while you still don't know everything about it is this balance, this beautiful artistic balance that you have to strike. And it's really hard to get that right, but it's really rewarding as you go along and sort of finesse the architecture and finesse the mental model, and it can be really frustrating and start feeling really almost claustrophobic when you're working in like a legacy code base or something where it's not even your mental model. And it is not even the way you would mentally model that problem domain. So this is really hard to understand. And now you have to take on someone else's
40 people's mental model.
right, their mental model, and the best way to do that quickly is to do so without judgment, right? Because if you do it with judgment, every time you go to attack that code base, you're just thinking, why would they do it this way? Those thoughts are useless at that point in time. That is something I have a really hard time with, right? It's like, how do I adapt all of these people? That is not the way I will model that problem domain, and now I've got to fit that in my head, and I want to judge the heck out of it, but I can't. I know I shouldn't, and I need to just learn it and understand it and find those abstractions and where the appropriate place I need to make my changes. And it's really difficult.
Yeah.
And it's always changing.
Yeah. I spend a lot of time just creating Post-it notes and putting them together, and then like, or spending a lot of time with a whiteboard and just like, just drawing little diagrams, looking like a mad scientist.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Corey, what do you think?
I would say it's appreciating the small victories and realizing that it is going to take time. Because for me, it's I say like, well, I can do more, I can do more, I can do more, and that's not always a good thing. You want to build a consistency. You want to have good work, but you also don't want to you don't want to tire yourself out, and where then it becomes a burden. You don't want it to become a burden. So it's all about, I'm able to do these 5 exercises out of this book. That's great, and that's good, and be okay with that. And it's, again, the positivity of it. And if something takes me longer, it doesn't matter because I still got it done. Because I'm coming from a different sidetrack where I sometimes have to go learn 4 things to do this one exercise because I don't know it as well. But then it was so exciting when I first put a virtual machine on my laptop and I showed my dad and his mind was blown. You can just literally see he's like, I have no idea what you did, but it's amazing. I'm glad you're having fun doing it. So that's what it is. Being okay with that it's going to take time, and just knowing that the long run, looking at the long game, where I'm going to be in 5 years is because I'm taking my time now.
Oh yeah, I wanted to add something to what I said. I think it's sometimes hard because it's like, you know, me learning was a while ago. It's not that long ago, but like going from like the building blocks and learning like how do you write a function and like to like putting all the pieces together and see like, okay, how does this turn into like something someone can use, or how does this maybe turn in like from a like command line tic-tac-toe into a tic-tac-toe that you see that you can visit like on a website or an iPhone app or something. Like figuring out how those like really specific things that you're learning, like when you're learning a programming language, how that turns into like software that any person could use.
Yeah, I agree. Context was a big thing for me because, like, when I started, like, I was the first thing I heard someone tell me was like, "Oh yeah, you should go to Codecademy and learn the things there. And after you do those courses, you'll be a software developer." Yeah, that's not true. But what is true is that I learned a whole lot of syntax, but had no idea where to apply it. So yeah, it was really important to actually know how this thing is actually going to like work in real life and the actual serious problem you're solving. Also, as Corey was saying, yeah, the just learning how to manage your time, how to work at a sustainable pace, how to not hate yourself because you're not a software developer yet. Yeah, those are all tough things, but very valuable. Yeah. What's the worst advice you ever received when you were learning?
I just block out bad advice, so I don't know. I have no example.
No
There you
example?
go, Tom.
Probably something I told myself at some point.
I think I just said it actually. Go to Codecademy and learn it, and then you'll be a software developer. Then again, actually, that sort of tricked me into doing it because I thought, oh, I can do this. And then it turned out that really wasn't it, but it didn't matter. I was already in it at that point. There's no going back. So, I don't know, maybe it wasn't so bad advice. Anyone else have any stories around just hard things or terrible advice or weird things that people told them?
The terrible advice I got in high school was, so I took a computer repair class in high school, right? And that's kind of where I fell in love with computers and like totally got into Linux. And my instructor he had amazing advice generally, but one of the things he said to me when I was starting to get really passionate about Linux was, there's no market for Linux no one uses Linux. Don't just focus on Windows. And I was like, well, I'm never gonna touch Windows. Like, much like a cleaning lady, I don't do Windows. So I guess I'm not going to go into the industry. And so out of high school, I went and did sales for a few years just because I didn't think there was a market for what I wanted to do. And it wasn't until I understood the industry and sort of the topology of disciplines that existed out there and sort of specialties I could sort of narrow in on and target with my skill sets that I felt ready to sort of jump into the industry. And that added years to my journey just because someone said, no one does Linux, right? And I had like the opposite of whatever the opposite of passion is. Hatred, visceral hatred. Yeah,
Flames
flames
outside.
There was, in no world was I touching a Windows machine, so I was like, no, I'm not gonna do that. And that, I think, was pretty bad advice. For all of the good advice he gave me, that one piece of bad advice kind of screwed me up for a little while.
Yeah, I was told that I couldn't be a software engineer because I didn't know calculus, but that was mostly from my college. So yeah, I mean, when you think about the times I've used calculus as a software engineer. Well, I mean, granted, Amanda, what do you think about calculus as far as, did you actually learn that? Is that useful to you?
In terms of for a computer science degree, I wouldn't say calculus is useful at all, but what's useful is like logic, learning how to write proofs, and yeah, not calculus. Is that necessary to be a software developer? And is that necessary to write good software? Like, no. Now, if you're building things at scale, like maybe, probably, like you
Or
want to, or it depends on what you're doing. But for like, you know, the general person who wants to like make an app, no, probably not.
Well, my philosophy on like math in general in software development is you don't necessarily need to be good at math because the computer's already good at doing math. If you're good at logic, then you can instruct the computer how to do its math, right? I can't do arithmetic in my head. Like when I go to pay the bill and figure out the tip, I'm counting dots on the numbers. I'm so bad at math. Like I'm really bad at adding, subtracting, doesn't matter that I'm bad at it, the computer's good at it. But I understand logic fairly well. I have a relationship with that's good. And so I can instruct the computer. And there are some disciplines that more math is gonna be better. You're gonna do better in that discipline with more math, and that's gonna top up. But find where in the industry you fit. If you're bad at math like me, don't go into those disciplines that require a lot of sort of pre-calculating and really being familiar with these mathematical techniques. Because that's probably not going to be your niche, but there probably is plenty of space for your skill sets in the industry.
I think what a lot of like colleges and universities are thinking is like, oh, we have this calculus class, like this is a way to make sure that our students are like, I don't know, capable of doing something technical that isn't as challenging as like another kind of math class that they might recommend. Like I think, at least at my university, like the math classes that were more proof-based were the classes that like the math majors were taking. So they wouldn't want to require that for all the computer science majors. They figure, okay, like the easier thing would be calculus. So, and again, like with calculus, and with any skill, it's all of, I think it's like how well it's taught, right? Not like, I'm sure you would have done fine in calculus if you had a good teacher.
Absolutely.
So.
Corey, what terrible advice have I given you?
Somewhat, no. I was not from you, but when someone, because when I say to someone that I'm doing like a mentorship or and then I'll say like I'm using a Windows machine because that's what I have. I have a PC. I've had a PC all my life. When someone says you shouldn't do it that way, and then I ask why, and they say no one does it that way. That vague advice, that's dangerous because I don't know why it's not a good idea. I find out, and that's the other thing. I think I need to go through. I myself need to have these mistakes, see why we don't do certain things, see why certain operating systems work better than others, because I don't have an understanding of it, and I don't want when someone says, well, why'd you do it this way? Oh, I was told because no one does it that way. I'd rather know why and be able to tell them, oh, you're repeating your steps multiple times, and with Windows machines it can sometimes be like operating a paperweight. And it's better to know that as opposed to just where people like, well, it's not done that way anymore, or it doesn't. It's more time consuming. It's good to know why it doesn't work, and when you find out like, oh, this doesn't work, or there's an easier way to do this, you'll also feel more gratification because now you know why certain things work certain ways.
So Ian's got to stop giving you vague answers. That's what he's saying.
He does it.
I sometimes give vague answers and sometimes I don't.
Right.
Yeah.
That's key.
So, spinning it on its head, what was the best part of learning software for you?
Writing something and then seeing something happen.
When it does a thing.
tough part when you're not working on like front end stuff is it's difficult to like show off and
Yeah.
have people be like, oh, yeah. I spent like several days building this API and like I'll submit a request and like show someone the response and they're like, cool, you get some text back. That's
When you
Okay.
explain to someone, it's
Excellent.
way easier for this person doing this other work to make this show up because of what I did.
Yeah, I spent a couple of weeks working on a minimax algorithm, and now it works twice as fast. You know? Yeah, that's always fun.
I think once it starts clicking, once you're like higher, like when you're thinking of higher level abstractions and kind of software design, then it becomes fun for me. Like that's the reward for me is I can. It's like when you're like learning to type or like play a game or something. This is a terrible analogy probably, but like in the beginning you're like super concerned with what you're doing with your hands and less engaged with like the thing that you're interacting with. And at some point that just kind of like disappears and now it's just an interface and like you're thinking about what you're doing and less about how your hands are supposed to move, right? And it's like the same thing with software development. In the beginning you're thinking, okay, what is this class I'm going to write? What is this function? What is this thing? And you're very small pieces and you're more concerned with that than like the whole big picture. And at some point it just kind of happens where you just cross over and you're like, okay, now these concepts are kind of higher level and you're thinking at the domain level as opposed to like, what is this abstraction of it?
Yeah, and I'm going to echo that because I think that's that like aha moment when you are just sort of, and it happens sort of per tool or per technology sometimes too, right? Is you are trying to learn this thing and you're spending so much time understanding this thing that you're not really thinking about all of the problem domain. You don't really get to give enough mental space to the problem at hand. But then once you sort of, maybe you have a project with that framework under your belt or 2 or 3 or whatever, and now it's just, you're now just thinking in that problem domain, and it's just, you're reaching for tools without having to look what they do, right? You can feel that, yep, that's the wrench, I'm going for that, and just get to work. It's just automatic, and it helps you get into that sort of flow state. And those sort of aha moments for me are absolutely wonderful. I love it. And sometimes I can get really frustrated for a really long time not understanding a thing, and then all of a sudden I'll have an aha moment, and the last 6 months now totally makes sense. Holy crap, now this tool that I've been working, because I still haven't, it's like my skills have been buffering for this whole time, right? And now in this aha moment, it's done downloading and now I have it available, right? And now I can sort of get to work and think in the problem domain with using this tool much more fluidly. And that's exciting for me. When I realize I've sort of reached that spot with a concept or a tool or whatever, I get really excited because I'm like, yay, I'm not so dumb as I thought.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that when you're doing it with someone else,
Yeah.
and you get into that state.
Oh,
and
that's
it
great.
together.
Yeah.
Like when you're doing good pair programming or in a mob. Yeah, when that works really well, oh man,
Oh.
that is so great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it almost feels like, you're actually connecting with other people.
Right.
You're solving something together, and you're sort of sharing a brain space.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Just, holy moly. Yeah.
Yeah. So Corey, you haven't,
To hop on that, I would say mine would be now being able to talk with people that I have friends that were in computers in college, or that are now doing system managing and developmental software, and I have these friends that now when I'm talking to them, I understand what they're talking about, as opposed to that sounds really cool. And being able to engage and meeting people in outside of this community and in my creative outlets, where I work, and someone is I saw a meetup happen at my restaurant. And I was able to sit down and talk with them, and that was really just kind of cool. Like, I can't believe I'm at this point in my life right now where all these people, like everyone had their badges of honors on their computers, Raspberry Pis and everything like that. And they were having a meetup, and I asked them how often do they do it, and they invited me to one. They're not in this state, but it was just cool that they came together, and how this is happening everywhere. It's happening everywhere, and it's possibly happening right under your nose, and you just don't even know it, which is really just fun, exciting. It's like you're now part of a secret club.
Yeah, I can see that. So, do you guys have any questions for each other, or should I open it up to people out here? You guys have any questions or ask for advice or anything? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, really very informative, and thanks for putting together such a diverse panel. It's very interesting to see coming from different backgrounds. But I want to go back to the question of math, and I'm interested to know if you can think of your elementary and middle school. Do you think that you had a good math education? And especially, do you think that you had a good math teacher? Maybe check that.
I'll start. My math teacher maimed me. I think that our education system sometimes has a sort of accidental success, where occasionally you accidentally happen to have a teacher who's really good in one subject, and that's what you end up specializing in. So, I had a really, really great theater teacher. So I ended up being a theater major because I had a good theater teacher. Now, if I had a good math teacher, it might be something different. I might have gone into something entirely different. But because of the fact that I had a good theater teacher, and I had a really pretty incompetent math teacher, that's not where I went. And I feel like a lot of times, like, school sort of tells us that, we're not good at this or we're not good at that, when in fact what's really happening is you're being conditioned to not like something, which in fact you might actually enjoy quite a bit if you ever had the opportunity to experience it in the wild. I don't know how many people have been marred by bad English teachers for Shakespeare, for example. But it's a shame, really, because he's really great. And I'm sure the same thing can be said about discrete mathematics, which, or polynomial equations from algebra. Oh God, that word just immediately makes me sweat. That's what I have to say about that. What do you guys think?
I think personally, the teachers I had in grade school and elementary school who were teaching me math were perfectly adequate. They were fine. They weren't amazing, I think, in the subject. So too, I am a terrible student in general. One of the reasons why I'm self-taught is because basically it's an authority issue, right? Like, I don't trust what you're telling me. How do I know what you're saying is truth? Because if teacher A tells me one thing and then the next year teacher B contradicts it, well, guess what I've just learned? No one knows what the heck they're talking about, and I should probably find out for myself. And I found that out pretty quickly for myself, and so I had a hard time sort of trusting teachers and what they were telling me, whether they were good or not. And that was something I had to rectify for myself. And I think I am naturally not good at math, but I actually now, when I have to dig into a bit of math to figure something out and have to teach myself something, I kind of get excited by when I do that. And I think that's just that my own personal mentality about solving problems has kind of changed. And my own insecurities around, like, I don't feel like, just because I'm bad at it initially doesn't mean that I'm like stupid or incapable or whatever. I just let that be and attack the problem, and yay, now I've got something working, now it's cool. And now I approach it differently than I did then. So I think they were fine. They could have probably dealt with that situation better. But you know, people are people, and I really believe everyone's just trying to do the best they can, even the bad teachers.
Okay, fine. I'll accept that.
Generally.
I'll say I think that my teachers were great. It was the curriculum. I mean, I probably had my priorities all mixed up in high school. I wasn't really interested in learning what I was told to learn, similar to you. But I don't know, for me it was like, I can't do the whole, you go home and do these 20 problems for arbitrary reasons. I'd like to have some goal that I'm working towards, or like have a more interesting problem to solve. So like if there's math that's part of solving a bigger problem, that would be more engaging for me than like, you know, go and do numbers 1 through 30 tonight. And it just seems very, I realize there's a reason for it, but it didn't work for me. So, but now I do go back and I look at like Khan Academy, which is fantastic. And it's great to go back and like now I feel like I'm in a place where I'm excited to kind of go through this, and it's a totally different approach, and it feels less like work and more like, you know, finding things out.
Can I ask a quick question to the people here, if I could just get a show of hands for some of these? How many people here have a degree or have had some formal training in software? Cool. How many have done a boot camp or something like that? Wow, that's quite a few. And how many taught themselves? Or, okay, nice. Anyone try online courses or things like that? A couple of people, yeah. And does anyone have like a mentorship, either formal or informal? Cool, yeah. So I got a good smattering of different kinds of hands there. I'm not sure if the video caught that, but yeah, there were hands that were raised. So yeah. Does anyone else have any questions for the panelists? Yeah.
You guys probably work together at times. I'm wondering how you find the different journeys you took to get to where you are now changes how you tackle software problems. Does it? And who's best? No. But no, more generally, just how's that affected how you approach these problems?
So I guess the thing that immediately pops into my mind is we do occasionally at the company, we do these like small internal conferences where we just kind of have people from either this office or other offices call in and give a presentation on something. And so like hearing Amanda come in and talk to us about public key cryptography, right, which is a very, I guess, computer science-y kind of a low-level subject, and hearing her, you know, be really passionate about it and like just nail the subject, and like I just walked away with my mind blown. I love that kind of aspect of it, right? Like I can come here and learn from folks who went down different paths, studied different things, have different ideas to contribute, and I just continue to learn from everybody around me. So yeah, it's nice to have different backgrounds. Otherwise, we'd all be.
You can't solve other problems if everyone has the same mindset.
Right.
And that's actually exactly why I seek out people like Amanda who have CS degrees, because they're going to have a very different approach than mine, and they're going to have some really key insight that I normally would not have.
Right.
So yeah.
Personally, I have loved working on projects where there is a diverse group of backgrounds, and sometimes there's some conflict that arises with that, mostly out of approach, you know, how we might solve a problem, or, you know, that's not the way it should be done sort of thing might come up. But I have, I've worked with people who had very, very well-respectable traditional educations, and people who, you know, completely self-taught, boot camps, and whatever it is, when we're all working on something together, so long as the respect is there, and respect for each other and respect for the thing we're trying to do, right? Usually the outcome is pretty fun. Even the conflicts can be resolved with a great amount of energy, but a positive energy, right? There might be passionate discussion, but it's never losing that respect. And I think that's great when someone with a CS degree can tell me, hey, you're stupid because you don't have your CS degree and this is how it's taught. And I go, well, yeah, but I know nothing and here's why.
I like that.
Right? And we come out with something fun. But you know, I have a different background. Like when I went into sales, I had to learn, you know, sales is, there's a lot of psychology and there's a lot of communication in that, right? So I had to work on those skills where a lot of computer programmers don't necessarily have those. So I might think about, yeah, that method of solving that problem works great in theory, but what you're failing to take into account is the sort of psychology of the problem domain, right? If we consider that, and consider how do we communicate the complexities of the problem domain, either in the developmental process, or to the user, whatever it is, right? Whatever we're trying to solve, you know, I might have a chance to bring that up just because I have that sneaking in my background somewhere, right? And someone else, like you might bring up something that really in the background is seeded by your theater experience.
Yeah, that actually does happen.
And you bring all of your experience to the table, and if you have a good diverse group with diverse interests and upbringings and in paths and stories, you get a really interesting outcome, I think, so long as it's done with respect.
Corey, you have any thoughts on that? I know you're just starting off.
I think the respect thing is extremely important, and that was actually one thing. I went to a meetup and I met someone and we started talking, and when I told them I'm just starting out, it was more interest, and they were excited that I was here with not having much information, as opposed to, well, why are you here? Like, there was never anything of, why are you here, or geez, you started late. Like, everyone, we all, if you don't remember where you came from, you can't appreciate to see when new things develop. And I think that's what it is. Like, we all maybe have different paths, but we all just want to do the same thing. We want to help people, or make things easier, or have robots start automation lines. Like, this is, it's a science fiction world, and it's just fun to be a part of that. But it is about respect, and just respect for yourself too. Like, if you go in saying, well, I don't really know much, but this is what I'm thinking, that negative energy is already depleted who you are as a person.
Yeah.
If you can't respect yourself, no one's going to want to work with that.
Yeah, and you'll bring that problem with you when
Yeah.
you come up with
Oh, God, yeah.
Because you'll end up like going like, well, you know, and then you'll start like I've seen things like that every once in a while. If someone gets really like, and especially if I have to fight this myself, because I get massive imposter syndrome from time to time. I'm sure that I'm not the only person who feels that way. Yeah, if I latch onto that too much, then I can start to attack other people out of the fear that I have of myself being inadequate.
Right.
And so really, like, the key to that respect is to start with having respect for yourself. And at least that's my impression of it. Amanda, what are your thoughts on the whole thing?
Of what? Like the working with,
Yeah, working with different
what
people.
everyone else said. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to work at Aizuss, is because I knew that people here come from all different backgrounds, and I think like that's when you most effectively, is when you have the different perspectives.
What are problems you find tracking that other people don't see when you look at other people, or is it not ever that clear cut?
Yeah, I don't think it's that clear cut, but yeah, I don't know.
I think we, I mean, once you start getting into like optimizing, like, you know, bottlenecks or something, right? Like your CS background might come into play a bit more than someone who has a very high level experience, right? They can reason about like what is the bottleneck in the first place, right? I think that, yeah. So those are the kind of problems that I think lend themselves to more formal backgrounds where you, or I don't know if that's true. I mean, I guess it's not necessarily going through college that does it. It's just like this material.
Yeah,
that
you
you
could
chose
be
to study over
self-taught,
time.
like computer science
Yeah.
expert. You don't need stuff. I mean, honestly, a lot of my college experience was self-teaching. It was like reading through the textbook over and over again, Googling and finding better lecturers at other universities to make the problem make more sense. Or oftentimes, like finding someone online who had a computer science degree and was able to explain it in terms that made more sense to me than my textbook or my professor did, or it was talking to other students, or it was going to the TA. So just, yeah, learning how to learn and learning from other people. There's so many ways, so many ways to learn something.
Yeah, I would say from a theater background, I'm used to working in an ensemble. And I'm used to thinking about the other people I'm working with. So a lot of times what I find that I bring to the table personally, just having my particular background, is bringing up better ways to do retrospectives, help the team improve, help the team communicate better with each other. Communicate, yeah, okay, that's a way to pronounce that word. Anyway, yeah, so I do that, and you know, I find that, yeah, that's something that I can bring, and because of the fact that, you know, that's in my mind just totally random, I imagine that anyone else, whatever background they have, I don't know, maybe they, you know, paint Japanese dolls, and somehow that's going to translate something somewhere into solving a problem that we have no idea what it is. So yeah, that's my impression about that. We are getting close to out of time. Does anyone have any last minute questions? Otherwise, I'm just going to go ahead and have one last final thought. So I want to ask the panelists if you could send a tweet back in time to yourself as you started your journey, what would that tweet say?
You're missing a semicolon on line. I don't know, I feel like it would probably be something along the lines of just, I feel like when I first started, I had really big, like, kind of windows in between learning computer science or software development. I would kind of tackle it, then, you know, hit kind of a wall and leave it for a few months and then come back. And I feel like that really kind of stretched out that beginning. Like, I think I would be more deliberate about my kind of defining a curriculum for myself. And well, yeah, this doesn't fit in a tweet, does it?
No, it really doesn't. You're doing a terrible job.
Tweets can be pretty long.
You can do like a series of tweets.
Don't quit.
Yeah.
There we go.
Well, okay, so what I'm going to do now is
Take a screenshot.
I'm going to take a tick mark for every word that you use. If you get over 140, then just say what you're going to say.
Don't quit. I'm sticking with that one.
Yeah, no, and before you even said that, that's basically what I was going to say, is something like don't give up. Because, like I said at the beginning of this, like, that's the only thing I think that's ever kept me at this, is just, I'm just not going to give up. I'm just going to continue at it. I'm just going to continue learning. If I don't know the thing I need to know, guess what I'm about to learn? Like, that's it.
Yeah, something about, you know, you can do it.
Right.
I mean, I could say I would go back to myself. Like I said, I like to say my software journey started in 2005 when I learned how to use iMovie. I could be like, okay, gotta learn Objective-C so you can write those iOS apps, get them out in the app store in the beginning, right? Those silly apps that made a lot of money. But
iPhone's coming out in a couple of years.
exactly. Yeah, but no, just like progress isn't like a straight line, I don't know, just like keep trying. Don't get disenchanted. It's okay if you stop and start again.
I would say life is chaos. Find the time to make it work.
Yeah.
Because I've had a lot of things happen recently that has derailed in some aspects and slowed me down. But if it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm up, I could read. I could pull out the computer. Like, you got to find the time. I sometimes am in a car 24/7 for 3 days in a row because I do odd jobs to pay for my job. The weird world I live in. And it's you. If you want it, find the time to do it. And that's really what, like, I would have not published a book that it didn't take me 10 years to do it. Took a while, and sometimes that's okay.
I want to change mine.
That's impossible now. You've already sent the tweet.
Mine is don't be afraid to ask for help from another person, because as much as Google is like really great and just like don't be embarrassed. Like for me, actually that was a huge issue in school. Like I was always so embarrassed to like admit that something was like challenging for me, or like to work up the courage, like go to office hours. Like definitely biggest regret is not taking advantage of the expertise that I had there more.
I definitely did not have that issue. I had lunch with teachers.
Different worlds.
Different worlds.
Time for one more quick question.
Sure, go ahead.
Let's suppose that these self-driving cars have become reality close. We have 4 prototypes. One has been developed by a thinker,
I know this question.
somebody that did whatever they wanted to come up with. One is like self-taught and through all that. Let's say one is online or taking online courses, and one with apprenticeship. And we have one more that somebody with formal education, all the training, computer science, mechanical engineering, manufacturing, and those are your choices, and they're all fully automated. Which car do you think would fit to?
I'm not going to pick any of them because I don't trust a car that's only made by one person.
There you are.
Good answer.
You see, I would think that all 4 of those cars are going to kill somebody.
Right.
However, if all 4 of those people sit down together and put the car together themselves, less people will do it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's my feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. Tom?
This is going to take me a minute. I'll just post on the meetup page my write-up of what I would pick.
Sure.
I'll close off with one final tweet for myself, what I would tell myself. What I know, or I would say what you know that you think has nothing to do with software has value. And what you have to offer has value. And not only that, but the world needs you to offer that. I spent a lot of time not feeling okay with myself because of the fact that I didn't have the math background, because I didn't have this or I didn't have that, or I didn't feel that like theater was relevant to my job. That's a lie. So that's what I would tell myself. Those things absolutely have value. And so whatever skill that you have, and if you're alive, you have skill, that has value. That's what I would say.
Can I ask a question of the audience? Is anybody here who's been to or has a formal education and a boot camp like experience and is willing to talk about like how that? Can you talk about like how those differed? Like which one, did you prefer a specific one, or were they kind of complementary? Or?
It was just accelerated when I got into boot camp. And then I studied, went to private school, went to college, and you decide a major then, and it's advanced for 4 years, and then went on to a master's degree. But then for software development, everything was crammed into those few months, and you're just constantly like learning new softwares and running tests, and just constantly creating, having to aggregate all of that information.
Cool. Did you feel like either one was like had a more competitive? So, as someone who didn't go to college, I'm curious if there's like a difference in the environment, because coming from like or working at a boot camp, it was like everyone was very supportive of one another, and I'm curious if it's a similar dynamic in school, or if it's more, it feels more competitive.
I think that at least the current ones that I've seen, a lot of the different boot camps, they thrive on the idea of being able to work together with different solutions. Whereas formal education, a lot of it was, there was the midterms and the finals, and everybody was cramming for those instances, and then to graduation, and then donating and paying for the education. So it had different facets of each of those factors.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, that pretty much concludes our panel. Thank you guys so much for coming out to this. Thank you, panelists, for we still have a few more minutes at the meetup. Feel free to eat whatever leftover tacos there are, drinks, talk to us, and yeah. Thank you guys for coming out. See you again next year.
Thanks, you.